Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the next session of the Indie Author Fringe. I am so glad you could join us, so thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this seminar and develop yourself and develop your career. In this session, you're going to learn about self-publishing poetry, why you should consider it, and most importantly, how to sell it. I'm your host, Michael La Ronn, and over the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about all things poetry. So if you're a poet, grab a coffee because you've come to the right place and you're going to learn a lot. But even if you're not a poet, I'll wager that you'll learn some things here that you can use in your own publishing business, regardless of what you publish, whether that be fiction, nonfiction, whatever that may be. Poetry is a very crowded but very unique market. So there are some interesting strategies that you can use to stand out in the marketplace, and we're going to talk about that. So let's get started, shall we? As I said before, I am your host, Michael La Ronn, and that is a picture of yours truly and my contact information if you desire to get in touch. I always love getting in touch with readers and with poets, and while most of my work has been in science fiction and fantasy, I have a passion for poetry, and I have dedicated myself to publishing regularly in the genre throughout my career. I am the author of over 30 books, and I have been publishing since 2014. While most of my books are fiction, I have 3 poetry collections under the pen name Elliot Parker. Poetry is how I got my start, and there is a special place in my heart for it, because if I hadn't started my career with poetry, in all transparency, my fiction probably would not be very good. I'm an active poet, and I publish 1 collection per year. I've been published in a few literary magazines. I actively submit my poems for publication, and ever since 2014, I've been screaming from the rooftops that poetry is the next market that will be affected by self-publishing in the ebook revolution. I've also been an advocate for poets taking their careers into their own hands, relying less upon traditional publishing, and approaching poetry with the same mindset and attention to detail as fiction authors have been doing. As we'll talk about in this session, that is starting to happen, and we'll talk about what that looks like and what that means for your career. But first, let's talk about what you're going to learn today. In this session, you are going to learn the requirements of success for a poet in this new world of publishing, what's selling right now, where to find poetry readers and how to connect with them, how to indie publish your next collection and why you should consider doing so, and ideas for marketing individual poems and collections alike. Throughout this session, we're going to do some case studies and delve into actual books on the market. We're also going to talk about some actionable items that you can do right now, either with your existing collections or with your work in progress. But before we dive in, I do want to encourage all of you to participate in the giveaway. I'm giving away 3 ebook copies of my 2 books, Indie Poet Rockstar and Indie Poet Formatting, to 3 lucky winners. These books contain everything I know and go deeper into what we're going to talk about today. Plus, they include some formatting templates to help you format your next poetry collection for ebook and print. So, if you're watching this and the giveaway is still active, be sure to follow the instructions on the webpage housing this video and enter to win. Next, a disclaimer. As always, I have to tell you that at the end of the day, this is your career and the choices you make regarding your poetry are yours and yours only. But my goal is to empower poets of all experience levels by showing them that there are more ways to make money than just the traditional one, right? So, got it? Your career, your decision. Let's get started. It's no surprise that the publishing industry has been turned inside out by a couple of things. Amazon's dominance in the market, the popularity of ebooks and audio, the rise of self-publishing, and last but perhaps most important of all, the rapid shift from reading paperbacks to reading on devices such as smartphones, tablets, and Kindles. Fiction and nonfiction authors, to a lesser extent, have capitalized on these changes, and they've honestly done an incredible job of making money from their work. Many are even making a living from their book sales alone. The sky's the limit, horizon's bright, and it seems like every day there's another success story of another author quitting their job to strike it out full time, right? The markets are hot, readers are buying, and money's flowing. And then we have the poetry market, which in many respects could not be more different. In the current poetry landscape, paperbacks are still king and readers prefer bookstores. You're lucky if you can find your favorite poet's books in print, and even luckier if you can find them in ebook format. And you've won the lottery if you can buy it for less than $7.99 US. Poetry readers have not truly embraced reading on digital devices, and established poets, for the most part, remain traditionally published. Why is that? Why is it that, figuratively speaking, right next door in the online market, fiction authors are crushing it, but there's nothing happening in the poetry world? I'm going to be honest, I've wrestled with this, and for the longest time, I just could not understand it. And there are just so many answers too that I just can't accept. Like, there aren't as many poetry readers, or Michael, poetry is obscure, or Michael, people don't want to pay for poetry. But here's the problem with that. I, as a poetry reader, prefer to read electronically. Paperbacks just don't suit my busy lifestyle. I haven't read one in years, and I'm sure I'm not the only person on the planet Earth that feels that way. Even if I'm in a minority, an increasing one at that, there are people all over the world discovering the same thing: the convenience, the joy, the uh, wonder of being able to read on the go on their devices. And for many people in developing countries, ebooks might be the only way that some people can read. So the question is this: does it make sense for poetry to only be available in print when a growing segment of the readers are going digital? Rhetorical answer is probably no. The other day I was talking to a poetry reader and I asked her out of curiosity whether she preferred to read an ebook or in print. And what she told me was that when it came to fiction, she read ebooks, but when it came to poetry, she read paperbacks. Now, the astute among you are probably thinking, well, there you go. The market doesn't want ebooks, right? But when I asked her why she read poetry paperbacks, her answer was that, well, she would read poetry ebooks, but she couldn't find her favorite poets in ebook format. Think about that for a second. Imagine, if you will, the extraordinary league of poets and poetry collections throughout the last 100 years out there that are not available in ebook format. Right now, there's probably someone who has just finished reading a poem in a literary magazine that they enjoyed. They'll go, as most readers do these days, to Amazon and they'll search for a book by that poet. They won't be able to find it. So what will they do next, you ask? They'll move on to someone else whose books are available. So then let's draw an obvious conclusion based on what I just said. Poetry doesn't sell in part because it is not widely available for readers to buy it. Therefore, the answer is to expand the markets and formats in which it is available. That seems like such an easy thing to say, right? But the reality is that traditional publishers and poets are only now just getting around to understanding this. All you have to do is look at the current bestseller list to see what I'm talking about, and we're going to do that here in a minute. Small presses, though, they get it. And much of the success in the last couple of years have come from those small presses who have embraced digital and modern marketing methods. But that begs the next question. If a small press can do better for a poet than a traditional publisher can, well, why do poets need small presses? All you fiction authors listening, you're probably rolling your eyes by this point, because this is old school. And by old school, I mean 2011. But for poets, all of this stuff is new. Let's talk about the requirements of success that every poet needs to succeed in the 21st century. First is an understanding of the market. You get this by reading poetry, watching the bestseller lists, watching other pioneering poets and what they do. For instance, if you look at the market right now at a high level, you could segment it into three groups. You have your devoted poetry readers who are serious about what they read. These are the ones who love poetry. It might be all they read. They live and breathe poetry, right? They are spiritually, emotionally, physically invested in the work. And then you have avid poetry readers who love poetry and they read it regularly, but they're not as hardcore as the first group. And then you have casual readers who maybe read poetry, but not all the time. Or you have casual readers who maybe the poetry book that they're reading might be the first poetry book that they've ever read. Right now, the paperback market skews toward the first two groups, whereas the digital market skews toward the casual reader right now. Now, expect this to change in the coming years, but that, in my estimation, seems to be the status quo. Now, let's talk about this for a second because it bears discussion. Think about the A-list poets. You've got Billy Collins, Maya Angelou, that caliber of poet, right? Their books are in ebook format, and for the most part, they tend to be widely available. They're not the ones we're talking about here. What I'm talking about is the mid-list poets. These are the ones who are regularly published in magazines. They've got a large following, they're widely recognized in the community, and a lot of people would know their names if you mention them. But not all of them have books that are widely available because they or their publishers haven't jumped on board the ebook revolution yet. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, go grab any literary magazine that you can find, either be on Amazon or off the shelf at your local bookstore. I want you to go through the literary magazine, and then I want you to look at all of the poets that have collections. Find out how many of those collections are in print. you'll probably find, as I have found, that a greater proportion of those poets compared to fiction authors either have titles that maybe might be in print for paperback, maybe they have titles that are out of print, and a lot of them don't have titles that are available in ebook. But I will tell you that this has gotten much, much better in the last couple of years. When I published Indie Poet Rockstar, this was almost an absolute statement. Now, we're starting to see a lot more poets and poetry collections that are coming into ebook format, but we're not there yet. It's still fairly early, but this is a number that is improving every year. So there's a lot of potential in the mid list, right? And when they embrace ebooks and perhaps self-publishing, right, they're going to bring entire segments of the market with them because they've got the readers, and they're going to expose those readers to new poets, i.e. you, if you've done your homework right. I cannot overstate this enough. As soon as the midlist poets start embracing the methods we're going to talk about in this video, that's when things are going to start happening. The same thing happened with the fiction market too, by the way. If you can think back to the early days of self-publishing, the most remarkable success stories were not those who self-published out of the blue, right? Like Hugh Howey, Amanda Hawking. You had those. But the best stories were those traditionally published authors who reverted their rights and self-published their work instead. And the reason they were successful is because they had the backlist and because they had readers who were willing to follow them. I predict that the same thing is going to happen with poetry. And until it does, we're in the early days. The next requirement for success for poets in the 21st century is a brand, and a solid brand. Think about the iconic poets from the last 50 years ago. I keep mentioning Billy Collins, right? Adrian Rich, Seamus Heaney, Yusef Komunyakaa. They have a brand that their readers instantly associate with their work. You probably already have a brand as a poet too. You just need to find it, embrace it, and work that into every aspect of your marketing. Branding starts with your covers, but it also extends to the actual content of your collections too, right? What is it that you write about, and how can you market that to readers? For example, my pen name Elliot Parker writes poems that are fun, quirky, and surprising. The poems take you places, and in each new collection, it reinvents itself, and I do something new and unexpected. I'm not going to say that I have the best covers in the world, but I like to think that they're consistent from a branding standpoint, and they make a fun promise to the reader. Another example, Billy Collins. The great thing about his covers is that they're branded. You know right away that you're looking at a Billy Collins cover. You've got the oil painting, and then you've got the author name, which is always going to be consistent with the white rectangle or square, right? So that's the kind of thing you want to think about as a poet, because that will help you stand out in a big way. But don't just think in terms of covers, also think in terms of content and how you're interacting with your readers. That is going to be a very, very important skill for poets that are going to succeed. Some other things to consider. Is your work accessible, or is it only for the most devout, patient poetry lovers? How do you interact with your fans? What's your reading style, your writing style, the poetic devices you use? All of that too is branding, and I encourage you to think long and hard about it. And for more requirements for success, and I'll go through these a little faster, a website. So please, for all that is holy and good and just and beautiful in this great big world, please have a website, and have a good one. I shouldn't even have to talk about this. And for fiction authors, that's not advice I would even give, because fiction authors get it. But so many poets don't have websites. It's just incredible. I talk about some good website techniques in my book, Indie Poet Rockstar, so I won't go into this any further. The next thing is mailing lists. It's amazing how many fiction authors have mailing lists and how few poets have them. In fact, I can probably count on one hand the number of poets that I've seen that actually have mailing lists. You can write the best collection in the world, you can get your poems published in the best magazines, you can garner praise with the most coveted awards, but all of that success is fleeting unless you have some sort of system to capture readers and notify them when you have new work. For example, if it takes you 2 years to write a new collection, as it does with poets, tend to be a little bit slower with producing their collections, readers who read your work today will have long forgotten about you 2 years from now. That's just the way of the world, folks. There are plenty of resources for mailing lists and how to use them, so I won't go into them here, but at best, if you're going to be a successful poet, you want to have a sign-up form on your website, a free poem or two to give away, and a couple of autoresponders to get readers familiar with you and your work. Next, you're going to need a reliable production system. The most successful poets, and this is my prediction, and we'll see if it's true, but I believe that the most successful poets will be those who can publish more work frequently. Nothing wrong with taking your time on a collection. Poets take their time with collections, but readers are hungry and they want the next book now. The faster you can create quality, well-produced collections, the better off you're going to be in the long run. The key is in building a valuable backlist of poetry collections that readers can explore, and then bundling those collections where it makes sense. Next, you'll need a reliable marketing system. At a minimum, you should be submitting your unpublished work to magazines on a regular basis, so much that you have poems at all of the major markets. Think about all the literary markets out there, and there are a lot of them, right, if you write poetry. And this sounds like a daunting task, but if you write new poetry every day or every week, you can get there. An acceptance at a magazine is the ultimate compliment and the ultimate way to market your work, for reasons that we'll cover later. But if you're going to do this, you have to know that this is a numbers game. And if you can produce large numbers of work, you can increase your chances of an acceptance and therefore a sounding board for your work. In addition to this, this includes finding ways to get in front of readers in other ways while making sure that the marketing doesn't consume you. And last but not least, and this is usually the thing that I lead with, but I'm ending with it, is that you got to have a great collection that is well edited and branded to genre. Easy to say, not always easy to do. I get a lot of questions from traditional poets on how to get their books edited, and the answer is that you can find poetry editors on sites like Upwork or wherever a fiction author might be able to find an editor. They'll review your work in exchange for a fee. I have an editor review my poems for clarity and poetic technique, and then I publish them. It's that simple. You can also find a book cover designer for an affordable price at the same place as fiction authors find them, and you'll pay around the same price. But the key here is that the techniques and the process for publishing a poetry collection are exactly the same as fiction. I've talked to a lot of poets who are a little bit intimidated by the process and who are nervous about the prospect of self-publishing, right? Because the publisher typically handles all these tasks for them. But as I've always said, self-publishing is an investment, but you take home a higher royalty at the end of the day and you control the rights to your work. If you do go the traditional publishing route, your work may not get the marketing it deserves. After a year or two, its shelf life is probably over. It disappears from bookstores if it can even get there in the first place, and it might even go out of print. Readers may never find it, and most importantly, it may never make it into ebook format if the publisher isn't savvy enough. This is why I advocate that poets self-publish their collections. You might be taking the financial risk, and if your collection doesn't sell, sure, it's not fun. But if it does succeed, all that upside is yours. If you succeed on the traditional route, you're only going to take home a smaller percentage of a sale, so in the long run, you may still make less money than if you self-published. In my opinion, and this is an opinion that has gotten me into trouble with a lot of people on the poetry side, the way forward for poets in the 21st century is to self-publish their collections, market their work directly to readers via magazines and awards and other marketing efforts. This viewpoint has gotten me into trouble because the poetry world, as I said before, just has been slower to catch on to what's been going on in the market. But from where I'm sitting, it's very clear. I believe the future is in self-publishing. The power belongs to the mid-list, and if you're a part of that, the sky's the limit for you. And something else to consider is that magazine submissions are far more important than on the fiction side. As long as magazines evolve and adapt to this new publishing environment, which I suspect they will, they're not going anywhere. And they're going to continue to be an important gatekeeper and tastemaker in the poetry landscape. Ultimately, though, readers are going to become increasingly important bellwethers in determining what sells in the poetry genre. In essence, this model technically isn't self-publishing, it's hybrid publishing, right? Because you're self-publishing your collections, but you're marketing the work to magazines. And this is fundamentally different from fiction, where magazine submissions are viable, but they're not by any means required. I argue that it would be very hard for any poet to gain traction without the support of magazines. That's where the readers are, and that's how they discover new poets to read. Next up is my favorite part. So let's take a look at what's selling by going to the actual popularity lists on Amazon. Okay, here we are on Amazon, and so let's take a look at what's going on the poetry lists. So if I just do a generic search and type for poetry, we see some ads here, and then here are the most popular poetry titles right now. So I'm just going to scroll through these, just go through what jumps out at me. And the first thing I notice is that there are quite a few bestsellers, right, from poets that aren't from the establishment. And keep going down, and I see Rumi, I see Mary Oliver, Poetry Handbook. That's a tried and true title. Great title if you haven't read that. And I'm just going through. I see some Edgar Allan Poe. See some best love poems. And if we jump to the second page here, which some readers will do, we see there's Tupac there, Czesław Miłosz, Robert Frost, Claudia Rankine. Okay, so Langston Hughes, right? So a couple of things that jump out at me here is that you see a couple of A-list titles, right? Not too many, but there were a couple. There were a lot of titles that were from people who were relatively unknown. There were some that probably were miscategorized, probably not in the poetry genre. But yeah, so to me, that's an area of opportunity. So I keep talking about the mid-list in this training, right, and how important they are, and how the future belongs to them, right? And there really aren't any mid-list poets in those first couple of pages. Now, it's just one key word, right? It's one key word. It's not necessarily the entire market. But I do want to go into a couple of titles that have been very, very popular. All right, so I want to talk about Milk and Honey. And this is, as you can see here, a bestseller. This is, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest success stories in the poetry genre here within the last, 10, 15 years. It's just incredible how much of this collection has taken off. So a couple of things here. First off, the cover, well, it's not the greatest cover in the world, to be completely honest with you. It is a #1 New York Times bestseller. That's extremely rare for a poetry collection. How many poetry collections do you know that have 2,211 reviews? That's just incredible, right? Next thing I'm going to notice is the price, $7.69. It's probably a little on the high side for ebooks, but readers have shown that that's the price that they're willing to pay. It's available in hardcover, it's available in paperback, it's available in audio, which is extremely rare. And it is narrated by the poet herself, so that is another fantastic selling point. And if you look at the book description, there's not really anything that jumps out at you, but this is a poetry collection about womanhood, and it has been one that has been extremely popular. The length is about 208 pages, but what I really want to talk about is if you scroll down here, Andrews McMeel Publishing, these are I alluded to small presses having a lot of success in the genre. Andrews McMeel Publishing has launched a good handful of poets that have just done really, really well on Amazon and digitally in the last couple years. But if you look at the sales rank on this, the sales rank is approximately 2,460. So if you plug that into a sales rank calculator, well, we're looking at probably about 80 copies a day. That's a pretty good number. So if we look at the reviews, there are a couple things that you can pick out here. The first is that this is primarily a woman's title, but there are men that are reading it. This particular review here, if you go down a little bit further, looks like it's being read at a women's activist club, so it's got some book club appeal. If we scroll down here, I think this sentence here really tells you what this is all about. Self-worth, breakups and makeup, sexual assault, and a father's absence are some of the many deep and emotional topics found in Milk and Honey. That's what this is about, and this is what's very popular in the market right now. Milk and Honey is perhaps one of the first and opened the door to a lot of other collections that are going to be similar to that, but this is one of the most popular genres right now in the poetry market. Okay, so here's another title I wanted to talk about, and this is The Last Time I'll Write About You. This is by Dawn Lanusa. What's interesting about this one is that this is not published by a small press. This is an indie author. Lanusa also happens to be, I believe, a romance author, and so it's interesting to take a look at this as well. So, as you can tell, this one is in Kindle Unlimited, and it is a bestseller. It's doing very, very well. And, there's not much of a book description there, but I think it's pretty clear that this is a poetry collection about heartbreak and romance, right? So if we take a look at the rank is about 4,300, which is about 50 or so copies on Amazon per day. Keep in mind, this is just a snapshot, right? It's not, it's not the end-all be-all of the title, but it's also 1, 2, and 3 in different respective categories. So this is another good example of what's selling, and another good example of the power that love poems have in the genre, and it's something I think that love poems are always going to be popular. I don't see the popularity of them ever going away. Okay, and the last title I want to talk about is also another indie title, and that is The Chaos of Longing by K.Y. Robinson. So, Chaos of Longing is a prose and poetry collection draped in raw honesty, ache, and eroticism. It explores trauma, mental illness, love, heartbreak, and the realizations from it all. So, as you can see, another similar themed poetry collection in relation to Milk and Honey and The Last Time I'll Write About You. What's interesting about K.Y. Robinson is that Milk and Honey is the book that inspired her to go on and write this collection. So, as you can tell, Milk and Honey is the title that really has created a movement, I think, in the poetry market. So if you scroll down, you can tell it's in Kindle Unlimited. It's available in ebook and paperback, which is always a good thing. And then if we jump down here, it's standard collection. It's about 121 pages, and it's at 1,340. So it's ranked currently higher than Milk and Honey. That's about 100 copies or so a day. And it's number one in love poems, African American, and poetry. So that's just a fantastic success for that poet, and just a testament to what you can do in this genre if you have your poetry collection that's dialed right into the sweet spot of the market, right? So 1,340 in poetry, that's a really good number. Even if you were not that high, half of that, right? What would it mean for your career if you were an established poet to be selling consistently, I don't know, 50, 60 copies a day, right? How many poets out there can say that? That is why I believe that the future is with ebooks. It's with Amazon. It's with self-publishing, right? Because this is the kind of success that you can have. Now, while this is a snapshot in time, it is just a indicator of the potential that's out there, right? Who would have ever thought that a poetry collection could have cracked the top 1,000 in Amazon? But it seems to be happening. So we've taken a look at the popularity lists on Amazon, and we've also taken a look at a couple titles and what makes them tick and why they're popular. And let's take a look at the bestseller lists. So what jumps out at me here is that in the top 6, with the exception of Jane Hirshfield, there are no A-list poets. These are all poets who I would argue are not establishment. 5 of these titles are in Kindle Unlimited, and if you do the math on these first 6, the average price is about $6.10. So it just goes to show you that the price point for poetry may be a little bit higher, but it still goes back to what's selling is those titles that are between $2.99 and $9.99, right? So if we scroll down here and take a look more at some of these titles, just note the notable absence of some of the most popular poets that are writing right now. I honestly haven't heard of a lot of these people. What I also want to take a look at is how many copies, or what would the sales rank be to hit the back of the front page, right? Because that's where you want to go. So it'd be 97.82. So that's about 16 titles per day. So if we just browse through some of these lists here, you go through African poetry, go through Asian poetry, maybe go through love and erotica. Just keep noting the notable absence of some of the biggest heavy hitters in the poetry market, right? There just aren't any poetry award winners or any kind of poets who are necessarily published regularly in literary magazines. It's just kind of a wild west if you really take the time to go through this list. If you're an avid poetry reader, you're just not going to see those poets that you read normally in literary magazines. And for me, this is an area of opportunity, right? Some people say, well, that just means it's not selling. To me, this is opportunity, right? Because if you get the right poet that has a way of amassing readers, they have a backlist, they have great marketing techniques, they have great ways of interacting with their fans, I think the sky's the limit. So that's just a quick high-level snapshot of what's going on in the market right now. Let's dig a little bit deeper into it. Now that you've seen some of the hottest poetry titles on the market right now, let's talk about some trends. First, let's talk about what's hot. Womanhood is huge right now. And when I say huge, I mean really, really big. It's not a surprise that the best-selling poets right now are all, without a doubt, women. There's a good word of mouth in this genre, and readers are hungry for more works by strong female poets. So if this is your genre, go for it. The second most popular category that seems to be selling very well is love poems. Poetry collections that have any kind of romance, whether it be falling in love, breaking up, and this shouldn't be a surprise, as this kind of poem has always been popular, right? Another category that seems to do moderately well, regardless of what's going on in the market, is African American and African diaspora issues. You're not going to see any collections go sky high as some of the womanhood stuff, but it has always been a reliable and steady genre in terms of visibility. Another category that tends to do pretty well is the backlist of A-list poets. So on any given list, you'll likely see Billy Collins, Mary Oliver, Claudia Rankine, Maya Angelou, etc., as it should be. The thing to watch out for is when you start seeing mid-list poets on these lists. Now that we've talked about what's selling, let's talk about what's not, at least at the moment, right? Don't take this as I shouldn't write this or I shouldn't, consider writing this. It's just they don't seem to be as popular as they used to be. The first of those is nature poems. This is a bit of a surprise to me because this was not the case a couple years ago. It seemed like you couldn't turn around without seeing ecology-based poetry. It was everywhere for a really long time. While it's still popular in magazines and with traditional publishing, environmental type poems don't seem to have the same power that they once had. It's all cyclical though, right? And if you happen to be a nature writer, I wouldn't stop writing nature poems, but just be prepared for that. The next is slam poetry. Many of the bestsellers currently have slam elements to them, but true slam, i.e. a Saul Williams style kind of poetry, seems to be out right now, at least in the ebook market. And last is the metered verse. Bless its heart, there just aren't very many visible poets doing meter right now. Most of them tend to be traditional and in the walls of academia, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a name for yourself. I think it would be a little bit harder. Fans of traditional verse also tend to be very picky and selective about what they read as well, so I don't necessarily know and I'm not convinced that the market on the ebook side is there for metered verse yet, but that'll change in the future. Now, with all of that, keep in mind that the majority of the poetry market is not digital yet. The market will shift dramatically as more poets bring their backlists online. Let's talk about selling strategies. Magazines, magazines, magazines. I cannot stress how important and critical they are to a poet. Produce a lot of work, send it out, and use those acceptances as a springboard to send traffic to your existing collections. Rinse, repeat. Your website and mailing list are also important. You want buy links to your books as well as a list sign up to capture your true fans. The back matter of your books is also an important area. Once readers are done with your collection, use an author's note or a call to action to get them interested in you as a person. Get them over to your website and either get them to buy another book or sign up for your list. If you can get enough people to do this, you'll start to have a platform. And the best way to implement this is to see what successful fiction authors are doing and then steal it. The techniques are exactly the same. So some more selling strategies, advertising. There really aren't too many sites out there that advertise poetry right now, but there are some. Additionally, there are some book bloggers out there that will also review poetry. Again, not something that will catapult your book into the charts, but enough that it'll get you some visibility. You also have the ability to use things like Amazon Marketing Services ads, which are cheap and they allow you to market your book to poetry readers, and the granddaddy of them all, Facebook ads, which give you a great level of flexibility in what type of poetry reader that you can target. And there is, of course, social media. For whatever reason, poets seem to do best on Twitter. I don't know why, but it just seems to be the place that they gravitate toward. I'm thinking in particular of Patricia Lockwood. She comes to mind. She's a fantastic Twitter success story. She's known as the poet laureate of Twitter, right? Check out her work. But there are others as well, and you just want to find out what social media platform works best for you. And last but not least, who can forget poetry readings? This is a rare jewel that poets really have access to that other genres don't, because who wants to go to a fiction reading? They're the most boring things ever, but poetry readings are fun, right? Poets get into it, they have fun with their readings, the audience is usually interactive. This is a very unique marketing tool that poets have at their disposal. Now, the thing is, poetry readings may not come up very often, but they are a very unique opportunity that poets have to hand sell books, perhaps more than fiction authors. I recommend that you perfect your reading and your public speaking skills, and make sure that you have paperback copies available for readers to buy. And make sure you can accept credit cards, as no one carries cash these days. Now let's talk about some fun stuff. These are some unique things that poets can do to advertise their work. This is unfamiliar territory. Audiobooks, they're the next frontier, especially for poetry. I believe that an audiobook narrated by the poet is a fantastic selling point. But if that's not your thing, you could probably find a good narrator if you were willing to pay out of pocket for one. It can be a cheap endeavor too. Most audiobook narrators charge per finished hour, and if you think about it, most collections probably wouldn't be longer than 1 or 2 hours. It would be extremely rare to see a poetry collection in audio, so you would stand out if you did this. From an investment standpoint, it might not be as much as you think. YouTube is another frontier that I think poets can use to their advantage. Invest in a good microphone and editing software, create a YouTube channel, and do some readings of your work on your YouTube channel and have some fun with it. Link to your book and show your book cover at the end. Those videos will be like little soldiers that continuously funnel readers into your work, and you'll make some additional money, probably not too much, but some additional money with Google AdSense. This is not for everyone, but if you're into performance and readings, this could be really good for you, especially if you're into things like slam, and it might also open the door to do additional readings too. And here's another one for those who have a lot of time and perhaps have dedicated their career to self-publishing. Consider doing bundles or box sets with other poets. You could do a box set with exclusive poems, or better yet, one with previously published poems that are available on Amazon or whatever retailers are out there. After each poem, link to the collection where readers can buy it. Imagine this for 10 to 12 poets, right? And it's a smorgasbord of books that readers can find. And last but not least, this is something that's a little strange and probably not something that the majority of people listening to this would have the ability to do, but it's something that could be effective, and that is starting a literary magazine. Now, in my book, Indie Poet Rockstar, I talk about an idea for a lit mag that I would love, I would absolutely love for someone to steal. It would involve minimal effort and have no slush pile, and it would turn heads very quickly. So those are some techniques I believe poets can use to sell their work. We're still in the early days, but I have no doubt that poetry will evolve and flourish in this new landscape. Don't let people scare you about poetry declining or dying or any of that silliness. There's a lot of that negativity out there. I believe that poets will continue to write poetry, readers will continue to buy it, and that its best days are still ahead. So let's recap, because I threw a lot at you in this last hour. The status quo of the poetry market is very much like the fiction market was in 2009 and 2011. The biggest potential right now rests with the early moving self-publishers and the mid-list poets who make their backlist widely available. Ebooks are the future for poetry, period. The poetry market for ebooks skews toward casual readers right now. The successful foundation of a 21st century poet includes a good understanding of the market, a dynamic brand, good covers, websites and a mailing list, and good, well-edited collections, and a reliable system for producing new work and marketing that work. To see what's selling, look no further than the Amazon bestseller and popularity lists. Magazines, they are a critical marketing tool for poets, an essential marketing tool, and you should consider using them. When it comes to self-publishing your work, many techniques that are available to fiction authors are also available to poets. There are also many opportunities to stand out and make a name for yourself on unique frontiers such as audio, YouTube, poetry readings, etc. And finally, I believe that poetry's best days are yet to come. I'm an advocate for self-publishing poetry because I feel that poets should take their careers into their own hands and they can do better for themselves than a traditional publisher can do for them. So that's the recap. And it has been great, guys, but unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this presentation. Wah, wah. But if you enjoyed what I taught you today, you can explore this topic deeper and learn more strategies about how to succeed as a poet in my book, Indie Poet Rockstar. It's the poet's guide to ebooks, marketing, and the self-publishing revolution, with plenty of case studies and solid strategies for you to make more money from your work. In all respects, I go a lot deeper into the concepts that I explored today, and I lay out my reasoning for why I feel that self-publishing is the future for poets. So I was really only able to touch on that today, but I really go deeply into that in the book. I also have a follow-up book called Indie Poet Formatting that teaches you how to format a stellar-looking poetry collection for ebook and print. A big hurdle for poets is formatting their collections for ebooks. In the early days, there was a lot of heartache and difficulty in formatting poems for ebooks because, as you know, the text in ebooks is reflowable, but there are some ways around that, and it's far easier than it used to be. As you'll find in the book, it's not much of a hurdle at all once you understand it, and I even include bonus formatting templates that take away about 99.9% of the effort. Whether you're a poet or whether you want to start writing poetry, I believe that these books are essential in showing you the fundamentals. Right now, they're the only books of their kind in the market and the only books for self-publishing and marketing written specifically for poets by a working poet. And don't forget the giveaway, folks. 3 lucky winners will get both books for free, so be sure to enter. My ultimate goal is to help poets. I've had wonderful mentors in my career who have helped me tremendously, and I just want to pay it forward at the end of the day. So if I can help just one of you unlock the potential in your work, then that would just give me great satisfaction. Thank you for listening to this presentation today. I appreciate your guys' time. I want to thank Orna Ross for inviting me to speak and all the staff at the Alliance of Independent Authors who did just a fantastic job putting this event together. I, for one, am grateful for all the wonderful work that Ally is doing to help promote the interest of indie authors, and to be honest with you, I would not have had such a good start to my own career if it hadn't been for a lot of the resources that Ally produced. So thank you to Ally for putting this together and for being a fearless defender of indie authors. And with that, I want to extend a final thank you to all of you who attended this webinar today. I wish you all nothing but the best in your publishing endeavors. This has been great, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Indie Author Fringe sessions. Happy book selling!